welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm Zoe.
And I'm Kelsey.
So we have a special treat today, which we say before any interview that we have, but it's always a special treat. But before we got into that, I wanted to bring up something that I found or that I saw on Twitter the other day, written by KJ Charles, who is the author of Band Sinister, the awesome male-male romance we read recently on the podcast. So she tweeted that she just received an email complaining that there was too much consent in her sex scenes. And she said, quote, "To be honest, I'm really struggling with why the hell you'd write that down and send it to someone," which, to be fair, yes. And she's got a whole Twitter thread about it. And she does mention Band Sinister. And what she mentions about Band Sinister is she says, the consent in Band Sinister is super verbalized because the experienced main character is not just getting consent. He wants his inexperienced lover to explicitly voice his desires in order to understand them and become more comfortable, which is for those of us that have read it, yes.
Yes,
and
100%.
We talked about the consent in Band Sinister on our episode. So I don't know if I articulated it that well at the time in the episode because, sometimes it's hard to articulate a thought that you're kind of just developing, let's say. But I think I said something to the effect of it felt to me like the consent in Band Sinister wasn't just there to be consent. It didn't feel forced, where sometimes I feel like consent can feel clunky. I almost always like it, but it doesn't mean that a writer necessarily is perfect at writing a consent scene. But I think KJ Charles is.
Yes. And I think maybe for me, when we were talking about Band Sinister, for me, I kept being look at this open and honest conversation. But
yes.
That's true. But consent is an open and honest conversation. It's you sent all these things from what KJ Charles wrote into it. And for me, the most poignant part of what she said was she basically gave a blatant example of different kinds of consents that romance novels do, where it's kind of the nod to consent. But is it really consent? And how, and it's just kind of thrown in there to be look, two consenting adults. And so this was kind of the breakdown that she wrote. And it was, I want to do X sex act. Tell me you want it. I want to do X. Do you want that? What do you think about X? Because I'd love to if you want it. And they're very, each one of those, she said, and then she says, those are not three ways of saying the same thing. That's three extremely different things, and bundling them all under consent is simply silly. And it was so interesting to see them side by side because, and we were just talking about it in, what was our last recording that we did?
A Beginner's Guide to Rakes.
Yes, A Beginner's Guide to Rakes. Because you and I were arguing about, was the consent there? Was it not? And, it's interesting because that book was written a while ago. And that's where the romance novels, instead of having, the blatantly old school romance novels of, it's blatantly rapey.
Yeah.
This was kind of the nod to consent, but it wasn't
the
consent.
Tell me you want me.
Yeah, tell me you want me.
That.
Which is and it's funny because I was so opposite because I was but it was there. It wasn't there was asking questions and you're no, it wasn't there. But seeing it all blatantly side by side, I was oh, I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing that there's the nods and then there's actually explicit consent.
Well, and I love how she talks about consent is basically in the right writer's hands, and I'm paraphrasing a lot. So she wrote a whole blog post after the tweet, which we're going to link in the show notes, and I highly recommend you all check it out because it's fabulous. And she has a lot of examples, but at one point she talks about how basically you can in the right writer's hands, consent is a plot device, and it makes the characters grow together because they're having a conversation about something and they're learning about each other and they're learning about each other's feelings. And she says this so much better than I do. So again, I really think that y'all should read it. But I'm just going to quote the last line that I had taken out here, which is, plot is character in action. So is consent. So anyhow, a great article by KJ Charles, and it is called Yes or No, Consent in Sex Scenes. And again, we'll link to that in the show notes. So Thanks, KJ. I'm so sorry that you had, that kind of stressful email from a reader, but as another reader, I really appreciated you taking the time to write this extremely thoughtful and powerful blog post. So
yes, no, absolutely. I think it was fantastic, and I will continue to say, like, I feel like when people are like, too much consent, I was like, what do you mean? Too much open and honest conversation? I don't know. Isn't that how real life is supposed to work? But then again, everybody knows I'm the misunderstandings, like, terror. Like, I hate them so much because it's just like, what if you just had a conversation about it? Wouldn't that be great?
Yes. And no, for sure. And I know we could talk about that all day, but we have something even better to talk about, which is we have our interview with Cat Sebastian.
Yes. Which, doesn't necessarily touch on consent, but it does touch on a lot of issues about diversity, inclusion, but also you'll find out about how she gets her characters and creates them. And that, I think, is very poignant to this conversation.
Absolutely. And so without any further ado, we will get into our interview with Cat Sebastian.
Today, we're joined by the sensational Cat Sebastian. Welcome, Cat.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you here to kick off, our first interview in Pride Month here. But we're doing 4 episodes, I should say, inspired by Pride Month. Mm-hmm. And we're just really excited to get to talk to you.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes. And so since we really like to start things out with a bang, we're going to break the ice with our toughest question. So that way, everything else is just way easier.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm braced.
All right. Do you have a favorite romance novel? And if so, what is it?
Okay. So I do, but the answer is complicated. Okay. So if you had asked me a year ago, I would have had a different answer. But like in the past year, I have read Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed, like 10 times. So I think I have, to just say that's my favorite. It's like, it is like about hockey players. Like it is a rival. It's like a rivals to lovers story about like gay hockey players. And on the face of it, there should be nothing in this book for me, like nothing at all. But it is so good. It is so funny. It's idiots to love. Like the whole book is just, they're just so dumb. They're too stupid to understand that they're in love with one another. They think they're having hate sex, but they're like passionately in love and they don't know it. And it is so funny and I love it. And it is like the most reliable comfort read that I have right now. So I think that has to qualify as my favorite. However, there is like way at the other end of the romance spectrum, there's Laura Kinsale's For My Lady's Heart, which is like, I don't think you could find anything more different than Heated Rivalry, but that's my other favorite. And it's like, you've got your medieval murder princess and you have, like a virgin knight, and they're like in constant peril, and it's like half written in medieval English, and it's so good. Like, and it's like heartbreakingly lovely prose, and I love it. And it is like 20 times more stressful than I can handle right now, but like, I'm really looking forward to reading it again. So those are my 2 answers.
Oh, that's so interesting. First of all, I've never read a hockey romance, so maybe now I have a place to start.
It is so good. It is so good. I feel like evangelical about it. Like it is. I talk about it constantly. I wish I could get like physical copies, and I would just hand them out to people. Like when we resumed like seeing people in person, like I would just like that would be like the thing that I gave people. Like, hi, I'm Kat. Nice to meet you. Like here, read about here's gay hockey players.
I love it.
Yeah.
And actually, the last author that joined us, also her favorite romance was Laura Kinsale. And I've never read a Laura Kinsale either. So we also already talked about it, that we're going to read one in July on the podcast, because we definitely need to.
Let me guess that it was Scarlet Peckham and it was Flowers from the Storm.
Okay,
yes, we've talked about that. Yeah. It's that book is, that would have been, if I had to list 5, that would have been up there too.
And she described it as like, if you want to sob for a few hours, like it's the best book for you. So another emotionally like heavy like, kind of book.
It's like uninterrupted crying for
Oh, gosh.
Great. Yeah.
Zoe, prepare ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I like July. I feel like if we talk ourselves up to July, I think we'll be ready by then.
Yeah.
And a good cry can be cathartic too. So
Totally.
I've definitely picked up books just knowing it was going to make me sob. And it's like, this is okay. This is what we're doing right now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a place for that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I agree with you that like right now I'm also really into the comfort reads. So I totally get that feeling.
Yeah.
So we want to know a little bit more about you and your background and your history with romance.
Sure.
Like when did you first discover romance? And then also, how did you first find gay romance?
Okay. So I've always read for a romance subplot. Okay. Like I've always done that. And like looking back, it is wild that I didn't come to romance before I did. Okay. And I can only blame just like internalized misogyny or something, that it took me until I was 32 to just like take the plunge. But what happened was I was like, my younger kids were born and they were twins. And so like I was just like very like I wanted to read. Okay. And I was spending a lot of time just like sitting down with a child in my lap. And so I wanted to be able to read, but I didn't want to read anything that had bad things happen. Okay. Like that was really key. So my home genre before that had been mystery, but like the idea of reading about somebody being like murdered, because I had come to like the like as part of my like postpartum like mental state, I had realized that everybody was somebody's baby. Okay, at some point, like that was like my big thing. Right? So, I couldn't read about anybody being murdered because like what about their mom? Okay, like which looking back is like what? But okay, but that's where I was. So I could only read about people wearing nice dresses and going to parties, okay, and drinking ratafia or whatever. Like that was it. So I read like everything by Julia Quinn in like 10 days. You know, like I read it all.
Been there.
Yeah.
You know, and then I slowly like worked my way through it and it was okay, I ran out, like, oh God, like this is a crisis, you know? And so I basically, and this is before I had a Kindle or anything like that. So I was like sweeping everything off the shelves in my library, you know, like into a tote and just like reading everything. And then once I started, I really didn't stop. Like that was it, you know, like I discovered ebooks. I guess this was now we're in like, it had to be 2011, 2012 at that point. And so, and I haven't looked back. You know?
Fair. I think getting a Kindle was spurred on by my love of romance in about the same years you're describing, because I went on vacation. I brought 5 books with me and then read all of them within the first 3 days of vacation.
Yeah.
So I was like, cool, I've got another 10 days here and I have 0 books.
And it's an emergency, okay?
Yes.
You know? But yeah, for me, it was I couldn't get Courtney Milan's The governess. Oh, what is it? The one with the
Governess Affair?
Yes,
the novella?
Yes.
Oh God.
I couldn't get it.
I love that book so much.
It's a perfect novella. And so
that's how we describe it.
That's how we describe it. Seriously.
It is totally flawless. It's exactly what you want in a novella. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go. And it was free. It was like $0. Okay. So I don't know why this felt like a huge plunge, like in an ebook. And so I did. So when you go back and you look at my purchasing history on Kindle, like that's the first book that I got, you know? And then after that we have, you know, like a book a day for 8 years.
Yeah, I definitely like have had moments where I'm like, I should go back and look at my whole purchase history. And then I was like, no, I don't want to know how much I've spent because every penny has been worth it. I think there's no reason.
Yes.
I was pleasantly surprised because my husband wanted to go through finances and things. And he was actually like going through credit card statements for a year. And he's like, baby, we need to go through this. And I was like looking at all my Amazon purchases, and I know which ones are the Kindle purchases. Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised at how much restraint I have.
Good work.
I think I only spent a few $100s in a year, which is like,
that's fine.
I thought I spent way more than that.
Yeah, no, that's you could have spent that really badly. And instead you spent it
exactly.
Well,
I know.
Yeah. And so then how did you end up, or how did you find gay romance?
So I've tried to figure this out because people have asked me before, and I had read gay fan fiction, okay? Like I had read like Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. Like that was okay, but like I hadn't connected it to historical romance at all. Like these were two totally different things in my head, okay? So people have said like, oh, like you must have like like what fan fiction did you write before? And I'm like, you know what? Like I wish I had, but I other than like when I was like 20, I haven't. And so I knew that as a concept, gay historical romance existed. And then somebody somehow recommended KJ Charles, and it was and then it was like snowball effect. I had read everything of hers. I had read all of the like Amazon also bots. I looked and saw what other people who liked her book had read, and like that was that. I was a happy reader. Did I think I was going to write it at that point? No. And that's also like, again, like you would think that I would make the connection like, oh, I could write this, but no, the first book that I tried to write was not in any way gay. It was like very, I don't ever want to look at that again and find out what it was. Like, I don't, it was like I had read too much Georgette Heyer and was like, I'm going to write that. Okay. And I'm sure it was not successful because I didn't finish it. But what happened was Avon was having, in the summer of 2015, they were having a contest that was like a round robin type of thing where people would write, there was a prompt, and then people would write the first chapter, the first scene, rather, of a story, and based on that prompt. And then there would be voting, and then based on whoever won the first round, everybody would write a second scene to follow off on the winner scene. And so I read the prompt, and I guess I was just in a mood, because I was like, you know what? Like, how come there isn't a space in historical romance for, like, I like dukes and ballrooms and all of that also, but how come we don't have, like, room for queer people in the dukes and ballroom and low angst historical romance scene, And so I wrote a prompt where that, like, I wrote a scene that answered the prompt, that fit the prompt, but it was about a gay duke who was a jewel thief, and like, or something like that. I could be, I don't know. And it was like, and much, and it wasn't like, I wasn't like mocking the prompt or anything like that. It was at all. And it got a lot of positive attention from the other people who were participating, and also from a couple of Avon editors, especially including the woman who became my editor, Al Keck. And so, like, she got in touch with me at some point and said, if you ever want to write anything, send it to me. And I was like, that of course is like, that's a humongous like boost to confidence, right? And so I had never finished anything at that point. And I was like, now I must finish anything because that's effectively an assignment, right? And so I was staying home with my kids at that point, so I had time on my hands, and they were at the point where they were in school a couple of days a week, and I was going to start doing things like remodel the house if I didn't have something to do with my time,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I was like, yeah, I'll write a book. Sure. Okay. And I did. But it was like, and that was the book that was The Soldier Scoundrel. But at that time, Avon hadn't published anything that wasn't, they had published something, they had a few non-straight books, but they weren't historical. So I didn't want to submit it to Elle right away because I assumed that she wouldn't want it. Which was stupid. I should have, but it wasn't it worked out really well because that's how I submitted it to my agent. I submitted it to like a handful of agents. There weren't many in 2015 who were doing who were selling what I was doing. Right. And so I queried a couple of them, and that's how I met my agent, and she was interested, and long story short, she sold it to Avon, and here we are.
Wow.
Brilliant.
I mean, that's so exciting too, because that was the first male historical that Avon published. It was. It really was.
There were like a whole bunch of others. Like at that point, Random House, KJ Charles was with Love Swept. She had, and they were their Random House, or at least they were. And I think Karina must have had some, and so there were others out there, but it was Avon's first. And when I was writing, I knew that the book I was writing was like an Avon style historical romance. Okay. And in 2015, that definitely made sense, right? Like there was a style that I felt like I could identify as like, this is like the Avon style. Like I was deliberately saying like, I want to write something that's like a low stakes, like more like angst than plot. Okay. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I'm not like 5 years later, I think that like our definitions of like what different people are publishing has really, really broadened, but at the time that made sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the more of these kind of slightly different novels. And I say slightly different to encompass just that I feel like the trend right now in romance is to broaden everything, and not just in, people of color or, different sexualities. I think like even the straight romances, we're starting to see just a slightly new generation. And I'm really excited by that. Me too. I really like that.
Me too. That's like every time something is published, that's like just pushing the envelope a tiny little bit. It's super exciting because like, that it's just the beginning, right? Like I can't wait until we have like a resurgence of medievals. Like that's what I'm like, I know it's going to happen. Okay. Like I know it's going to happen that we're going to have most of the medievals that are out there are like straight and white, right? Like they're like, and I say that as like a huge fan of like what's out there, but like you just know that there's going to be like more is coming, and then we're going to have like the restoration romance of my dreams, and like this is all going to happen. I'm just putting it out there. Somebody write the restoration romance. It can't be me.
Super. So you were published through Avon to begin with, and then you've published quite a few books since 2015 as well.
Yes, I have.
Which is
yeah.
Yeah. I think it's at 11 or 12. I think I'm at 11 or 12. Yeah.
Dang. Wow.
Yeah. Which actually isn't even that many. I mean, there are people who happily write 3 books a year and they don't look back,
Well, it's true. I'll look for new releases from authors that I love. And, there's some of them who will have 2 books out in 1 year. And then there's other authors where I'm waiting 2 years for the next book.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with like who's working a day job, right? Like that's right.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then I also saw that, you've self-published some books as well as had, publishing companies.
Yeah.
So are those self-published books because you just loved them and needed them out in the universe quickly?
Yes.
Or
it's so, when I wrote the Hither Page is like that's my self-published novel. Okay. I have another novella. I have another novella that's in an anthology, but it's not, it takes place in I'm going to blank. It takes place in 1949. Okay. And,
Okay.
it takes, or 47. It's something like that. Okay. It's right after World War II in like a Miss Marple style murder village. And it's like, you've got your detective and your spy and they fall in love while solving like a really bloodless murder that took place in a stately home. Like, you know what it is, and,
yes.
and it didn't fit in with what I assumed that nobody was that none of the like traditional publishers were going to want it. And so long story short, I self-published it and I'm glad I did because it's pretty niche, but enough people liked it to make it worthwhile. And so the sequel will happen eventually when I finish writing it. And then the other book that I've self-published is a novella that's in an anthology, He's Come Undone, and that just came out either last week or the week before. I have no idea. And that takes place in 1959 in America, which is like the first book I've written in America, which was exciting. And so, I also have a follow-up to that, which I'll self-publish probably in the fall. So, but yeah, basically the books I self-publish are ones that I can't see being marketable more broadly, like that aren't, that like, like it's like when I talk to my editor, I know that what they want from me is, historical that's like in the traditional definition of historical. Okay. Like UK and before 1900. Okay. And that's fine, but sometimes you want to write something else and you don't know if there's really going to be an audience for it. And self-publishing gives you enough flexibility to take a risk.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense because like the time periods you're describing are often more seen in, like I've read them more just in regular novels.
Yes, that's literally, like, that's exactly what my editor said.
And that's the thing is, and and like you said before, you're reading a lot of mysteries with like a romance subplot, but that wasn't the main plot. And a lot of those books you're describing that take place in that time are often either mysteries or they're war novels or something, but the romance is like the key element to it.
Yeah.
And that's why I enjoy them.
Yeah, no, me too. It's like those are periods you see in like women's fiction with like big air quotes. Cause I don't know what that means. And I'm not sure anybody knows what it means, but that's, whereas like, it's not literary fiction and it's not romance, but there is, like you said, a romance plot that usually ends happily. And, but it's a totally different, I guess it's a different audience. Like, I guess it is. I don't know. Does anyone know? We have no data on this. And it doesn't, yes, it was, and what I'm writing isn't like, it is not like women's fiction, historical fiction. Like, it's a romance novel. You know what I mean? Like there's no like sweeping tale of warfare or whatever happening in here. You know, it's like people falling in love and like, drinking tea and nothing really happens.
Beautiful.
Oh, that sounds great. So we wanted to get a little deeper into, gay romance in general and also writing historical gay romance. Okay. And so I have a kind of a broad question for you. But what do you think makes gay romance different or sets it apart from, let's say, like hetero romance? Okay.
I think that once you start chipping away at the idea that romance is supposed to be for straight, white, rich, able-bodied people, then you are opening the door to challenging a whole lot of other premises. Okay. So once you cast non-straight people as the leads in a romance, I think you have to question like a lot of the like fundamental inequalities in the period that you're writing in. I think that you have to look at, gender. I think you have to look at inherited wealth, and I think you have to look at, and this is all also going to come down. You're going to have to look at like xenophobia and like race issues too. You're going to have to, because you're writing about people who are outsiders, even if they're passing as insiders. Okay, they probably will have questioned what makes them an outsider, and they may have thought about what makes other people outsiders. And so if they're thoughtful, like introspective people, then this will come through in their worldview. So I think that there's that. Does that mean that every single romance involving queer people has to be an issue book? No. Like, it doesn't, but not at all. Like, I think that it just means that you have an opportunity to write about people who have challenged the status quo. And I think that's, I mean, and I like doing that. Like, not every character I write has that at the forefront of their mind all the time. But one of my books has a radical publisher in it. And I feel like it makes total sense that this flows from the fact that she's queer, and so this like informs the way that she sees the world around her. She's not going to be happy to get married. She's not going to be happy. I mean, she does. Okay. But like, it's not like, that's not her. She's not delighted about it, and she's really not happy that the person that she winds up marrying is not only rich, but that he's inherited a title. Like, this goes against everything that she knows is right and fair. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think that, so yeah, and I like doing that. Like, I like writing characters who are not happy with the world around them and may not be devoting their lives to like activism, but that what will be required for them to have a happy ending is not going to be what you might see in a typical traditional, in air quotes, romance novel.
Definitely.
Yeah. And would you say, because I've seen, through the internet, I've seen you kind of sum up your books in like one trope. Like, you were commenting on like Two Rogues Make a Right as like One Bed, the novel.
Yeah.
Which
yes.
I love the synthesis of it in such like a very like tiny matter. But would you say that like you like writing stories? Because you've also said just even now you were saying some of your stories, like there's not a lot that actually happens plot wise. Would you say that you like writing stories that more emphasize the character's journey versus like the plot? Like the plot is there to kind of help them realize, themselves, or like what they want and get to that goal. But would you say the characters are your primary concern? Yeah,
yes. I mean, I really love reading plotty romance and plotty things in general. But as a writer, my books tend to have the minimum amount of plot needed to scaffold the character's emotional journey. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying, like, actually the book I'm writing right now has more plot. Like, I'm just trying, like, as an experiment, I'm seeing if I can write a book where things happen. But like, my books tend to be about characters who, like, their main journey is getting over themselves. Okay. Like, they need to like get rid of whatever garbage they have in their brain and learn to take care of other people and let other people take care of them. Like, that's the main journey. Okay. Like, nothing external needs to happen to make that complete, other than them just seeing the light, pretty much.
Yeah, that's fair. Because I mean, the reality is most people have their self-introspective moments, not because radical things are happening around them, but because they've just had a moment where they're like, maybe I should self-evaluate right now.
Or like, like, this is exhausting. Like, living the way I'm living is just exhausting. Like, it's taking so much out of me, like, to constantly remind myself that I'm not supposed to do this is tiring. What if I just like whatever and I give in, you know? And that's like really unsatisfying in a book, but like you can sort of tweak it so that like that it's the culmination of something that's been happening for many chapters.
And I know we've kind of touched on this already, but I feel like right now is the perfect time for those sort of stories, right?
Yeah.
Where the stakes don't feel as stressful. It's just, you know, and I mean, romance, we all know that at the end, they're going to live happily ever after. So we know we're getting to that moment, but still sometimes right now, it's just nice to feel like you're on this journey of two people falling in love. And that's what it's centralized around, like even more so it's hyper them falling in love and them becoming, you know, overcoming their own obstacles. I really like that.
Yeah. And that's like, what's the most fun for me to write, you know, like it's characters who have, you know, a lot of conversations and they spend time to one another and they're like working out like how their two different personalities will work together and they're sort of sanding off the edges. Like that's what I like to write. And it is it's like really hard actually for me to figure out like how to make stuff happen in the context of all of that, which is maybe not great from a craft perspective, you know, but it's, like what I want to do is put characters in a room together and have them work through their shit. Okay. So like, and you really can't do that. Like you really can't have 70,000 words of just that, you know? So like, I'll be like, okay, well, they'll go on a picnic and work through their shit. And then they're going to go to a play and work through their shit. Like, you know, and that's like, and you know, and like, and maybe we'll have like a little tiny morsel of a B plot, you know, like, and that's what I do.
Yeah, as someone who just like a day or two ago finished an arc of Two Rogues Make a Right, I'm trying really hard not to like interject anything because I don't want to have like spoilers. I do want to talk about it a little bit at the end of this, but I'm just like yes. So anyhow, but I want to know what drew you to writing in the past in the Regency area, because not very many people were writing queer stories in the past. Certainly not a lot that were getting, you know, a lot of notice, right? I mean, obviously you've named some names already. I'm not trying to say that no one was doing it and you were the first one. But it's not maybe the obvious choice, you know?
Yeah. So part of it really was just that like I had read like everything Jordan Hawk had written at that point. And I was like, well, yes, I will set something in like a sort of past, you know, you know what I mean? Like, and it just has a lot to do with what I was reading. I had also been reading a lot of, like Cecilia Grant and Courtney Milan. And so like I had that idea of like a low plot romance in the past, like in my head when I was starting to write. Like I knew it could be done. And I realized also that sounds like incredibly like, wow, like 2015 me like really was full of herself that she was like, that she read Courtney Milan and Cecilia Grant. I was like, well, yes, I too can do that. But what I mean is that they were writing that the kind of book that also has the minimum amount of plot to scaffold the characters' angst. Okay. Like just enough happenings to hold up their like emotional journey. And so I like that. And I also like the idea of populating the past with people who are queer, disabled, not rich. Okay. Like I really, really like that. I like the idea of including people who get excluded. Like that I find really, really satisfying from a writing or creation perspective, you know, like because, and that doesn't mean that no one else is doing it, but certain characters are overrepresented and some are almost invisible. And so like with Two Rogues Make a Right, I was like, you know what? I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen somebody with like tuberculosis in a romance novel where, and like at the time, some shocking number of deaths in London were from tuberculosis. Like a huge number of people had it. Okay. And it is not a particularly glamorous disease. And although like I had watched like Bright Star, in which like Ben Whishaw dies like very prettily of tuberculosis as Keats. And so I had that as inspiration, like so much so that like when I was talking to Joel Leslie, who does the audiobooks, he was like, we're doing Ben Whishaw for this character, right? I was like, yes. like he knew. But I wanted to include somebody who was, chronically ill in a way that was, true to the era. So I do like filling my stories with people who don't always get included in historical romance.
I love that because I like history, if you couldn't tell by my love of historical romance. But, we've talked about it in the past, Zoe and I, on the podcast about, you skip over a lot of the not so pretty romantic things about the past eras. And like you just said with tuberculosis is like the world's oldest, deadliest disease. People have been dying of it for like hundreds and hundreds, like since the dawn of time, they've been dying from it. It's literally the oldest disease people actually have recognized. And people are still dying from it today.
Right.
And it's just so interesting because you're right. Like the reality is, but it's also talking about like syphilis. Like the reality is people were dying of syphilis in the Victorian era. People were dying of tuberculosis. And it was kind of a crapshoot whether or not you'd get either.
Yeah, totally. Also malaria. You know what I mean? Like there's just, like people have it, people don't really know what to do with it, and it winds up being a fact of life, not only for the people who have it, but for like society, So yeah.
We just read a Julia Quinn with malaria.
Yes, I know. Wait, is that when he was Wicked? Is that the one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Oh my gosh! But before we tangent too far, so. What do you find the differences or what would you say the differences are of writing queer stories in the past versus set today? Like, what are the difficulties or that you think maybe are a little bit more, or do you disagree with that statement?
So I've never tried to write a queer story set today, but I mean, I don't ever, like with my Regency set books, no one's talking about being out, right? Like that's the main issue. No one's talking about being out. I mean, no one's talking about being out publicly. Being out to friends and family is different, But I think that like the fact that they both know that they are going to have to keep their relationship on the quiet because there's like actual literal danger out there, like that I think is probably the key difference. But even as I'm saying that, there's plenty of queer people out there today who are not safe, and who face like actual, like, legal discrimination and also physical danger if they come out. So like in broad strokes, that's a difference. But when you get down to individual people, it's maybe not, right? And also in the past, there were plenty of people who were powerful enough that they could do pretty much whatever they wanted. And like they're like the big consequence to them if they were discovered was that they might have to go to the continent, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that like that, like the need for secrecy is a big one. And like the acceptance of discrimination also, like that's, you don't want to, again, like the world is, history is filled with happy queer couples. Okay. And not everything, and the acceptance of discrimination doesn't mean that you just take it. And it doesn't mean that you're sad about it all the time, every minute of the day, but it's there. So that's a difference. And also the figuring out of how you're going to be together in a practical sense, without triggering anybody's suspicion. right? Like that's like where the happy ending has to include a cover story, right? So I would say those are probably the key differences. But other than that, like, you know, really I'm just writing about people who are trying to figure out a way to be happy. And that has more to do with the individual character's needs and personalities than it probably does to do with the setting or with, you know, their identity.
Brilliant. And do you feel like queer historical romance has set rules, which like a lot of people will think that there are for straight historical romance? Or do you feel like maybe since there are fewer people writing it, there is more flexibility to establish those norms of the genre?
That's a really good question. I think that like what I was saying before about how when you're writing about people who are outside, like who are outsiders in at least one way, I think that lets you challenge other conventions. I think that what a grand gesture looks like, or whether you even need one, okay, is because we're talking about people who may need to be private, right? You might not need that. Also, obviously, the happy ending doesn't need to include marriage, and in many cases can't include marriage, right? So, like when I've written 2 male-female romances, and one of them ended in marriage and one of them didn't. And it didn't even occur to me to have the second one end in marriage, okay? Because I had written, because I had written at that point 8 books that hadn't ended in marriage. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so it wasn't a particularly, I think that was easy for me as somebody who's writing queer romance to like get away with that, you know? So there's that. Other than that, like I'm like very aware that what I'm writing is in that, like I am writing a historical romance. Okay. Like I am trying to write things that will satisfy readers of historical romance, but also satisfy people who want to see themselves in historical romance. Okay. So I don't ever want to stray too far from what historical romance is, because I'm trying to deliver something that will satisfy readers. Okay. Like that's me. Like there are plenty of other people who are pushing the envelope more and in other directions, but that's where I'm coming at. That's how I'm doing it.
I think it's still pushing the envelope as far as like keeping the happily ever after to not marriage and babies, because, you know, like while, you know, personally, like I want marriage and babies, like that's not necessarily in a book, but like I personally want that. But just even having a happily ever after, as you said, you wrote one that was a male female that didn't end in marriage. I think that's fantastic because there is so much. Like society itself is moving away from the fact that women have to get married, women have to have babies. Like some women are like, you know, for a long time, my sister was like, honestly, I don't even know if I want to get married, you know? And she did have like the typical romance of she met the right guy and now suddenly marriage thoughts are in her head. But like it wasn't like that wasn't her goal. Like her goal wasn't to get married. And I think there's plenty of people like, and for you writing characters that people can see themselves in, writing happily ever afters that are outside the typical allows people to see themselves in the character in a different way. So I'm all for it. And I think it's excellent. Sorry, there really wasn't a question at the end of that. I'm just saying you're excellent.
Well, and I think like as a, you know, a straight white woman, right? Or just maybe as a very avid reader of historical romance, I just really, like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I'm really loving just seeing different versions of the happily ever after and seeing different people fall in love. Like I love love, and I find when you get to a story that you don't expect, but does something that, or when you're reading a story and it does something you didn't expect, or maybe it makes you think a little bit more, or it challenges you to see that that's their happily ever after. And even though that's not the happily ever after you thought for you, like, I still think like there's just so much you can get out of that, like when I got to the end of the Raycast, which spoilers for the Raycast, if you haven't listened to our Raycast episode, and she doesn't get married. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, and then like immediately I was like, no, that's the right character choice for this character. And so I should be happy because they're getting their happiness, So I think it's the same, just reading about different people. I just think it opens up your eyes, even if you aren't of that, demographic, right? I think hopefully it makes you grow as a person. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the reading we've done this year for the podcast has definitely made us grow as people. Neither of us had read male-male romance or any sort of non-hetero romance before this podcast. And we even mentioned it, or we were talking about it recently where I was like, yeah, I'm so glad we did that. I did this podcast and it opened our eyes to that. I don't think I was ever actively avoiding, different romances, but I just didn't know it was there. And I didn't have any inkling that it would do everything for me that a hetero romance would do for me. And I'm so thrilled that, I realized that and I grew from that and I found that. So, but it's not all about me. So,
but I think that a lot of people have had that I think many people have come to queer romance from straight romance in that way, where you start to you're like, oh, this is a happy ending. And then you broaden your definition of what a happy ending is. Mm-hmm. And then this is good because now you have more things that satisfy you as a reader, So I think that that's just like a really I think that is something I would love to see happen across many different axes in historical romance, right? Like it would be so great if we could have that happen with a whole bunch of romances that aren't set in Europe or America, right? Mm-hmm. Like that would be like, I don't know if you guys have read Jeannie Lynn. Okay. Like she wrote a whole bunch of,
I know who
historical romances set in, really a long time ago, China. And they are so good. And she's not writing them anymore. And it would be, and they're also super duper tropey, like Harlequin romances. Mm-hmm. Like they are like, so they're so satisfying for a reader of historical romance who comes in and you're like, oh, it's a My Fair Lady retelling, and like, or like, oh, I was talking about like, Murder Princesses with Laura Kinsale, like, oh, this is a murder princess, and I would love to see, it would be so great if we could have more of that, because like what you just described about like, coming into queer romance and being like, oh, it's a romance. Like, I feel like we could have that happen with romances that are, that are diverse in setting and in like casting, I think that would be great. I hope that's next,
So I think that leads pretty well into the next question I was hoping to ask, which is, why do you think that there are so few people writing those kinds of stories, or specifically writing queer stories in the past?
So I think there's more and more and more and more. Okay. Like I think that in 2015, you probably could have counted on, well, I know you could have counted on two hands the number of people who were doing it, because I did count, because I needed to know who their agents were, right? But it has grown exponentially since then. Like I keep saying, like I got in like right at like if I had waited a year, it wouldn't have been interesting to anybody. Like I would have, do you know what I mean? Like I would have been like one of mm-hmm. 50 different people doing the same thing. I think that based on just the number of like arcs that I have like sitting on my phone right now, like there's a huge influx of queer romances in a whole different variety of settings coming our way soon. And that's really, really exciting to me. So it's happening.
Yay. We're going to sidetrack a little bit because we have a listener submitted question.
Okay.
So this is from our listener, Chris, and they ask, would you say Marx has a real influence on your work? They said they are curious because you have writer of Marxist tract in your Twitter bio.
No, Marx himself has no influence. Like, I'm sorry to Karl Marx. But no, really, like, that is, so like, you know how when you're in college, you do like a Marxist reading of the text, right? Like and you're looking at everything from a class perspective. Like, this is super self-aggrandizing, but like, I like to do, when I started writing, I was thinking about like a Marxist. I'm rolling my eyes so hard at myself, which you cannot see because this is a podcast, okay? But like, it's like I wanted to look at it from a class perspective, okay? And so class is a big deal in several of my books. Not all of them, okay? But most of them. Class is a big deal. And so while like Marx himself has very little to do with it, the idea of like looking at things through like a filter of like a Marxist reading does in a very, very loose, flexible, and probably badly applied way. That's all.
That's fair. I mean, that's totally fair. It's funny you say about being in college and reading like Marx and all this. I was a political theory concentration. Like, I have a major in political science, and like my concentration was theory. So like I've read all the books and all the class things, but it's interesting because sometimes I read when like there are the class struggles, especially if you get them and it's like, you know, like you get those books that are more like war-torn Europe, like sort of deal. And you're like, but the class struggle, this is actually very real. Or every once in a while you get like a political radical as like one of the main characters. And you're like, how are you going to be able to like, you know, work with your political leanings and also like find your happily ever after?
Yeah. And there's like, again, like one hand, I feel like I can count the number of like actual radicals in historical romance. And I generally write, like, I don't really write people who are like activists. I have one radical I have one radical publisher. Okay. And her partner is a radical cartoonist. Okay. But other than that, it's mainly people who are thinking about that. Okay. But yeah, like I think Rose Lerner also has a radical printer, and Katie Charles has a whole series about radicals, you know, like, and so there's, you know, like it's out there, and it does tend to be characters who are already marginalized in one way or another. Like that does tend to be how it works. I'm trying to think of others, and I'm drawing a total blank. Oh, well. Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to circle back around to the stories and the historical romance stories. And what would you say to someone who would say, but gay people can't live happily ever after in those times?
So like the first year that I was, like the year after my first book came out, I got a lot of that. Okay. Like that was an email, a lot on Facebook. Okay. And like whenever I did an event that was a question I would get. It doesn't happen so often anymore. And I wonder if that's because there's so much more queer happily ever afters. So, I mean, my answer is always that there are, like, the world is filled with, you know, history is filled with happy gay people, okay? And just because you have to keep quiet publicly about who you're with and who you are doesn't mean that you can't be privately happy. People say the same thing about anyone who isn't white also, okay, and anyone who isn't Christian. Like well, there was discrimination. How can you possibly write, happy endings between people who were oppressed? I mean, well, how can you write happy endings about women? Okay. Like women were treated miserably for ever, how could you do it how can you write a happy ending for women today? Okay. And the answer is that individual people find a way. Okay. And you're writing about the people who find a way. So that's my answer. That's my polite answer.
Love it.
It's very polite. It's very good. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, I hope you know that we're not those people asking that question, but I think that there are a lot of people who wonder that. And I will actually freely admit, I did wonder that before I had read one. And I will also completely admit this, that but before we started this podcast, the diversity of my reading, again, was very small. It was very, lords and ladies, and that's what I wanted to read. I didn't even want to read, about the blacksmith. I wanted to read lords and ladies. If there wasn't a title, I wasn't interested. And I look back on myself and look back on this in shame, I will admit, because I read the Brothers Sinister series by Courtney Milan is really one of my favorite series, ever. I love it so much. I treasure it. But Talk Sweetly to Me, where it features a Black heroine and a white hero, which is the novella that's the 5th book in the series. I remember reading it and just the whole time feeling, but they can't live happily ever after. But they can't live happily ever after. And I've never reread it. And I know we will get to it one day on the podcast. So I'm waiting. I'm holding that out because I know I'm a very different reader and a very different person than when I first read it. And so I understand that my bias was there, right? My bias was there and I didn't see that. And I think I'm just so grateful that there are more books like that, that feature diversity and feature different happily ever afters right now, because I feel like that has made me grow not just as a reader, but as a person, Well,
also when something makes you realize, right? When something makes you see your own implicit bias, right? That is itself a good thing, right? And yeah.
Definitely.
It's funny you mentioned that about your own bias, because I remember reading a novella, and it was the hero was mixed race and the woman was white, and it took place in England, and he was poor and she was slightly higher on the class scale, marginally higher. But it's funny because when I read that book, I never questioned their happily ever after. I never questioned it. Versus I read a different book. And now I'm just thinking maybe there's just something about the book that just wasn't my cup of tea, essentially. Because I was reading it and it was the same thing. It was an interracial couple. But the difference was it was taking place in the American South in middle of the Civil War kind of era. And I really didn't even end up getting through the whole thing because in my head, from page 3, I was like, what's this happily ever going to be like? Because all in my head, I'm just thinking about American history and I'm like, they're just going to get killed.
Yeah. Right.
They're going to get lynched. What can we do about this? Well, and so but it's so funny because when you were talking about your own bias, Zoe, in my head, I was like, oh, this one totally has a happily ever after with an interracial couple versus this other one, can't have one. And it upsets me. So it was very interesting, to see those differences.
I think that this is part of it is because we see culturally, we have so few stories, popular, well-known stories especially about Black people during and after the Civil War. They have been systematically erased from our history, and that is why, we sitting here as white people in 2020, it takes an extra step to be oh yes, there had to have been happy, fulfilled, in love people of all races, just despite horrible things happening, because we know that people find love and happiness despite horrible things happening. That is what we do, But there's also a whole bunch of like romance and also like general fiction or women's fiction, like about like that era coming out soon, which is also really, really exciting. So written not by white people. Okay. So like that's, which is like the other key, you know, like, which is that it's like having a white person perspective on like an interracial relationship and the Civil War era South is, I'm not sure I want to think about that, you know? So
But I think that actually is a perfect little segue into, because we're still talking about race, to talk about, so I recently watched a documentary that's on Amazon right now about gay romance. It's just a 45-minute documentary. It's free. And it's about what is it called? G-A-L, the gay, I'm so sorry. I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's a gay literary conference that happens every year. And it was kind of like centered around that. But one of the things that they mentioned is that, you know, the fan base for male romance seems to be predominantly straight females. And I'm going to take it a step further and just from conjecture, say it seems to me like it's predominantly straight white females. Do you agree, or do you think I'm on the right track there? But why do you think that is? Why do you think that that's the fan base?
So there has been in especially male romance, there has been a history of some serious racial. I mean, it's racism, but it's like there's so much. There's not only gatekeeping to publishing people of color, but also racism that just is like literally right there on the page of the book. Okay. Which I can only imagine is deeply alienating for readers of color. Okay. That said, we're seeing an improvement, incremental, slow, disappointing. Okay. But it's happening nonetheless. Also, in terms of readership being mostly straight women, I feel like that was probably true a couple of years ago. But the people I mostly hear from, and again, this is obviously a self-selected group of people, the people I mostly hear from are queer women. Yeah. Okay? Like those are the people who reach out to me. Still women, but not necessarily straight. I don't know why. Like, I have no idea why. I can't, and since it's not like we have actual data on any of this, or on anything about like what groups of people are reading any kind of romance. I think that it used to be that people who read gay romance only read gay romance. Okay. Like it was super duper siloed. Yeah. Okay. And it maybe fit a certain mold of like white men who fit a certain model and acted a certain way. Okay. Like, and this is years ago we're talking about. Okay. Now I think there is much more crossover between people who read all different kinds of romance. So I think that queer romance is less siloed. And I think that like the idea of like the reader as a person who exists is not as true now as it might have been, at least from what I see. And also like people who recommend my books often will recommend them in the same breath as someone who's not writing which I think to me speaks for itself. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, so, and that's often like, if someone will tag me on Twitter or on Facebook or something like that. And so I'll see that. But I mean, I hope it's less siloed because like the culture that we're talking about from several years ago of that like very racially problematic, that's not great. And I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see it sort of become more diffuse, let's say.
And so also in this documentary, some of the interviewees mentioned something that I thought was interesting. And they said that they became louder advocates for LGBTQ rights after they started writing. Did you find this to be like the case for you? And someone called it being like publicly gay, you know, because even though they were a straight person, before, like, did you talk a lot about gay rights before? You know, do you feel like you're more political after publishing queer romance, or the same, or you're not really trying to be political here?
I've never not been, but I've never not been publicly and politically queer.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? That's never like, I always have been. The difference now is that I have a platform.
Yeah.
Okay. Like that's, you know, like I could talk to people in my life about things, right? But now I can talk about it to a whole lot of people all at once. So that's the main difference. But I've never been shy about my feelings about any of that.
Well, good. Me neither. I did think that was an interesting thing, you know, that some people kind of went through that metamorphosis. I think specifically an audiobook narrator was talking about that too, you know, and anyhow. But he wasn't a writer, right? He was just a narrator. And so it's just some interesting stuff. Again, I thought the documentary was quite interesting. And again, if you have Prime, it's free on Amazon. It's short. It's nice to see that kind of stuff getting made. So,
yeah. And we kind of touched on it before when we were talking about how you tend to focus. The plot isn't necessarily the driving force. It's the character development. And so how do your characters come to life, because you write such diverse characters with such diverse backgrounds, sexualities? You really are striving to be very inclusive in the characters you create. So, like, what's kind of your process as far as creating those characters?
I mainly start out with like a setup or a trope. Okay. So it'll be like, I'll be thinking opposites attract, or I'll be thinking like a second chance at love or whatever. Like that's what I'll be thinking about that. And then I'll be thinking, and then I sort of, as I'm brainstorming, and this is before I write anything down, even an outline, I'm thinking like, okay, like what if they used to go to school together? Or what if they used to be neighbors? Or what if now they're neighbors? And then I start to go from there. But I'm really starting with that setup or with the trope. And then I start to get a sense of what their personalities are, and also what the conflict would need to be, like what their internal stakes would need to be. And that's when I start plotting. And I'm a very bad plotter. I do plot, but like I do it so unsuccessfully that I don't. Every single book, I think to myself, this time, I'm really going to get it right. Okay, I'm going to write this outline. I'm going to follow the outline. I do not follow the outline. You know, but when I try to not do the outline at all, I wind up with chaos. So anyway, that's when I start with the outline, but really it's only as I'm writing that I really drill down to who these characters are and what they want. I often have an idea beforehand, and that idea is often very wrong and bad. Okay? And I'm fixing it as I go. And then I fix it more as I revise. Okay. But often, like when I go back and revise, I'll discover that the character that I've written for the first couple of chapters is not the character as they are later on. And so I have to go and fix those first couple of chapters. Okay. Like often as I'm writing, like right now I'm writing about a highwayman. Okay. In like 1750. Right. And he's partnered with like the prissiest, fussiest aristocrat, like who needs to hire him for a job, right? But it's also like a one last heist type of story where the highwayman has been trying to be on the straight and narrow for a little while, but this like fussy aristocrat with his embroidered coats and his wigs and his powder and his high heeled shoes is like tempting him, but like that wasn't working. Like something was wrong. Like why is he being tempted out for like tempted to crime by a pretty face? That doesn't seem quite right. There has to be something else. But what is that something else? And it took me weeks to figure out that there's something, that he has to have some other reason for not currently being, living a life of crime, you know? And I also figured out that like what I thought was the aristocrat's major problem isn't. You know, and so like there's that's pretty much what I do. I heard somebody describe this as like writing as discovery. Okay. Which initially sounded like very much like, are we journaling? Are we journaling about our characters now? But no, what it means is just, it's that process of you're writing and then you think about what the character would do in that. You're like, okay, they walk in like they run into one another in a shadowy alley. Okay. Like in my outline, it may have that they begin passionately flirting with one another, but okay, no, that doesn't seem right at all. One of them is definitely punching the other one in the face, you know? and so like, cause that is, you only realize then that that's what's true to the character. There are so many writers who don't need to do that. They go into writing with maybe not a fully formed vision of what every single scene is going to be in the book, but they know at least who the freaking characters are. Okay. And what their conflict is, like what their like goals and journeys are. Okay. And that is just not me. And that took me many books to figure out that I need to write the bad book before I can write the good book, you know, and that's just how it's going to go.
That's fair. That's me writing any essay in college. It was literally like, let me just word vomit on this page. Yep. Mm-hmm, and then same thing, always started with an outline. Like I knew where I needed to go. And then it was like, let me just word vomit on this page and then we'll go back to it.
Sometimes you don't see the flaws in your reasoning or like in your thinking until you've actually put the idea into practice. Okay. And that's how I wrote all of my essays in college too. You know, it was the same thing. And some of us have to learn by doing. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're doing. We're learning by like going through the writing, and then we can feel our way through, and then we can like achieve a vision that we didn't even know was the vision, you know. But yes, that is how I do it, for better or for worse. It's the worst possible process I could have devised, but that is apparently the process I've got. So.
Hey, everyone has a process. It doesn't mean it's the best process. It's just a process.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And then since, you mentioned like working through it like as you go and discovering the characters and discovering where you want to go, I had saw a different interview you did like last year sometime, and you mentioned having like a sensitivity reader, which I just thought was cool because I was like, it's like a fact checker. But for other things.
Yes.
I want to, so like, do you just give them your raw pages and you're like, hey, read this and tell me what you say?
No.
Or do you like heavily edit and then hand it to them?
Okay. So for A Gentleman Never Keeps Score, one of the main characters is Black and living in Regency, London. And like, there was absolutely no way this project was ever seeing the light of day until like a Black person had read it and made sure that I didn't like completely and totally drop the ball on this. And so what I did was I hired an editor, like she's Black, Tasha Harrison. Okay. Like she's a really, really good editor. Okay. Like she's actually a phenomenal developmental editor, which is what you need. Okay. That's what you want from a sensitivity reader, is somebody who is a skilled editor who can be like, okay, so, and basically what she told me was, this character is going to be thinking about race more than you have him thinking about race. Okay. Like, this is going to be like something that is paramount in his mind, and it's going to affect the way he sees the world, you know? And she said a whole bunch of other things that were super useful. And she also happens to know a lot about history. And so it worked out really, really well. But and that happened, I wrote that book earlier than I ordinarily would have. So that way, after I got it back from her, I still had almost a month to do revisions before I sent it to my Avon editor. Okay. Mm-hmm. So she got what was like the same kind of draft I would have sent to my critique partner or my beta reader, like a pretty polished draft, but not anything ready for publication. For other books, same idea. For Unmasked by the Marcus, I had they weren't editors. It was Anna Szabo and Jordan Hawk, who are both non-binary writers of queer romance. And so I was friendly with both of them. And so I said, look, I know this is a big ask, but can you just go through this and just make sure that I'm not doing anything horrible here. This is not my identity. I want to make sure that I get this right. And so they did. And again, they both gave me feedback, like for places where they thought the character would have had a different response or a different feeling. For another time I inadvertently used a sensitivity reader was when I had written a character who was on the asexual spectrum, and I did it terribly, and my critique partner was just like, no, back to the drawing board. This is not it. Like, just throw it away, Cat. And so she didn't say throw it away. She was very polite, but she made it clear that this was not working, and that this is not that this would probably be deeply annoying at best to a lot of people who identify as asexual. And so I did not. There is no asexual character in that book. There is actually, she said, but it wasn't the main character. It was like I shifted it around. Okay, but again, I was super grateful because I don't want to. Like, you don't want to harm people. You don't want to get things wrong. You don't want to be, So I was very grateful for that. But yeah, for me, having somebody do that is very reassuring to know that, like, okay, my manuscript is in the hands of someone who is an expert at being this identity. Okay. And they have more knowledge than I possibly could. Like you said, it's fact checking, and it's also like a kind of editing, So yeah, my experiences have been super positive. So I'm glad about that.
That's really cool to hear, just to hear about it and hear kind of how the feedback loop works. And yeah, that's just really interesting. And I want to talk a little bit more about your, characters in your upcoming book, which is Two Rogues Make a Right. And that comes out in just a couple weeks after this podcast is going to air. I think it comes out on June 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So
it's June 20 something. Like
whatever.
We'll
get it right in the podcast show notes for sure. But yeah, no. So like I said, I had the the luxury and honor to get approved for an arc of it, and recently read it. And I don't want to spoil anything for people here, so I'm not going to go too in depth about it. But one thing that I did want to mention, and if people don't want to hear anything about it, then skip forward a minute or two. But was one of the characters kind of wrestles with depression a little bit. And I just, you've kind of spoken on this earlier in the podcast about kind of shedding light on differences that we as humans have. How about, to make a blanket statement. Yeah. And I really loved reading it. I thought it was really subtle and also poignant. And like, I don't know, it spoke a lot about, depression and not having to get better, but just to have support. And sometimes like, that's just who you are. And you sometimes have gloomy days. Yeah. And so I don't know, I really liked that, obviously. But I wanted to know if you maybe wanted to speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah. I kind of have gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like the crap I have in my brain is just going to be the crap I have in my brain, and that's permanent. And I have, anxiety and depression and like whatever else. And like and it is okay. Like that doesn't mean I'm delighted about it. And I happen to have access to medication, which they didn't in, 1820. But I like, write what you know. Okay. Like they always like, okay. So a whole lot of my characters have some level of anxiety or depression or just, I realize probably brain garbage is not the best way to like phrase that, but that is what I call it. And that is what I call it to my children when they're having like when they're having brain stuff that feels like it's not great and that it feels like it's out of their control. That is the kind of brain I know about. Okay. So it makes sense for me to write about people who also have that kind of brain. Mm-hmm. And I like it. Like if I were to write about somebody who, when I do write a character who's like really got their stuff together, I'm like, wow, that's, can't relate.
Well, I also like seeing a character who, has a difficulty or has depression or anxiety that isn't fixed by love, because that's not really how it works. I think like love can definitely be a support system and can make you stronger and can help you in dark times, but it isn't, a cure for most of anything except not being in love,
Right. It's sort of like you can be a depressed person in love. Like that's a thing that can happen, and like you can be loved while being depressed. Like, and those are like that's, I always feel like when depression or PTSD or whatever is cured by love, like the other message is that you can't be loved while you have that going on, right? And I don't think anyone intends that to be the message, but it's there anyway. So I like to write people who are pretty much in the same place with their health or mental health stuff as they were on page 1, as they are at the end. And the difference is, like you said, just that they're in love, So.
Yeah. I've read a couple books recently that had a similar theme where it was like, there was a guy who had severe PTSD and like through the love he had for, his wife and like the love she had for him, he was working on it. And that's where the story ended. It was like he was working on it. Like his blackout moments were fewer. They happened, but they were fewer.
Yeah. And that's kind of like I feel like that's probably a realistic, that's, like to be working on it and to be like, okay, I can chart incremental progress. Like that's actually a pretty good place to be,
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I just, I really liked the way you did it in this last book. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. No, I'm not actually at all, even a little bit, but just to say, I really recommend, Two Rogues Make a Right, and everyone should go read it pre-order right now, and then read it when it arrives, because it's gonna make you smile, and it's definitely the kind of book you need in a time right now. So I just really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. Thank you.
So then I guess to wrap up a little bit here, because we've gone pretty long. I feel like we could talk to you all day though. So what's next for you?
So I'm writing the book about the Highwaymen, and I'm turning that in a month. And then after that, I'm writing the Hither Page. I'm finishing finally the Hither Page follow up. Okay, and then I'm writing, and then there's I accidentally wrote the follow up to the novella that came out in the anthology earlier in May. And so that ought to come out this fall too. Ideally, this fall, I'll have a follow-up to Hither Page, and I'll have a follow-up to the novella that was in He's Come Undone. So
you're just a busy bee.
Seriously.
I always feel like I have not done anything. Like that is all. I'm always like, damn it, I do not know why. And I realize this is an extremely common feeling for a lot of people, and especially women, because
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. And the thing is, like, when I leave this room, right? Like we are recording in my bedroom. Okay. So like when I leave this room, I'm going to walk out into the living room, and it will be amazing if like the dogs have not eaten a jar of peanut butter and my children haven't like shed blood over who has the, whose turn it is on Animal Crossing or whatever. And I'll be like, oh, I wasted time, or whatever. But but the fact is, no, I talked to you for an hour and a half. That is a good thing, And also earlier today I did stuff, and later on today I'll write my words, But I think that I always have the feeling that I didn't do anything. But okay, no, I have had 2 books come out this year. And unless I screw up royally, I'm going to have another 2 come out,
Amazing.
And that's I feel like that's okay. I feel like that's okay.
That is so much more than okay. I mean, but I really empathize with that feeling. I'm definitely one of those people too, where it's like, I only did these 10 things today. That's like nothing, what was I doing with my day?
I'm on the opposite spectrum. If I can just get my house clean, I'm just like, okay, today wasn't a waste. The house is not a mess.
I tell myself that's where I am. That is what I tell myself. Where I'm like, look at you. You drain out the tub. A plus. But then
we're not even that sophisticated. I'm just like, the dishwasher got emptied. It was a success today.
But I think it is important to be always, being gentle with ourselves. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to kind of be gentle with yourself and tell yourself, if the dishwasher is the only thing I can do today, then that's okay, and that is a victory.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
For sure.
So, as final, where can people find you? If they want to know what you're doing and what's coming out and where they can find the millions of books you're writing in a year.
My website is catsebastian.com, and I pretty much live on Twitter. So that's at Cat S Writes. I also have Facebook and Instagram, and I'm always trying to be a better human being and actually use those.
Nah.
But yeah.
Nah.
I'm pretty much giving it up as a lost cause. Maybe I'll, I should probably just post pictures of my dogs to Instagram because, right? And just call it a day.
That's all people really want to see on Instagram anyway.
I know. That's all I want to look also at pictures of people's planners, because I'm like, wow, look at you with your planner. But and I know I'll never do it. But no, that ship has sailed. But yeah, so Twitter and my website, that's really where I am. Yeah, that's where to find me.
That's great.
Great.
Well, we were so happy that you were able to join us today for this whole hour and a half that you got to escape. But it was so fun to talk to you and so interesting. And just thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. I had a great time. Thank you.
Well, wasn't that just a blast, Kelsey? I had so much fun talking to Cat.
I did. We could have, we had to cut ourselves off a little bit because we were just, really just jiving.
Yeah, it's so cool to get to talk to. First of all, I feel really privileged and lucky that we get to talk to authors that we love reading because, what a cool thing. And then I also love that we get to share that with all of our listeners. I just love that these authors make themselves so accessible to those who are really interested in them. And anyhow, it just also was really fun.
Yeah,
it was. A fun convo.
It was. And I love it was very conversational, which I love. And, a lot of times you and I outline this whole thing and we have all these questions and they just get answered and we don't even have to bring them up. It's cool, that's done.
Seriously, it was so great because a lot of the things we wanted to ask were just things that came up naturally in conversation and kind of got covered. So it's it's always really cool when you're thinking about preparing and then you're we were totally on the right wavelength there because the conversation just worked in that direction and we got to learn all the things we were interested in learning. So
yes.
so cool, so fun.
Well, it's really fun doing this because, in all honesty, I hope you guys like listening to our long form interviews, because I love a long form interview. I think they're great just because things just get brought up, and it's just doing them is so much fun because you get that conversational aspect going. And
Yes,
I've loved everyone we've talked to, and this is no exception. Like I loved Cat. And I loved our conversation.
We come out of these interviews like with such a big smile on our face. Like, and I also feel like rejuvenated and energized, and I like want to go read and write, and I don't know. I just like, it's such a cool thing, and I should try to find an adjective better than cool, but that's where I'm at right now because my excitement and adrenaline is up from having a fun time.
We can't always be eloquent when our excitement is through the roof.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much to Cat for joining us. I think that was just, really lovely to have, especially here in Pride Month. I'm so excited that there are more people writing queer romances in the past, because like I said before, I feel like reading more diverse books has made me a better person. Like, I know that's a kind of a big statement, but I really feel it has. It's expanded my worldview. It's shown me some of my prejudices and my biases and made me grow from those. And so like, I'm just really thankful for that, because that's not the person that I see myself as. And it's always a little shocking when you like run into something and you're like, oh shit, that's not good of me, But at the same time, then you're like, okay, like, how can I make it better? And so also just great books to read, like great books. Yes. So again, her next book is coming out June 23rd. So that's even closer than I said the 28th. So yeah, June 23rd, third in the Seducing the Sedgwick series. And it's called Two Rogues Make a Right. And this was part of our 2020 historical romances we just can't wait for list. So like, guys,
we couldn't wait for it, and now it's your chance to get it.
Seriously. And I will say, I actually had not read the two first books in the series, and there was like a little bit of confusion in this one for me, just because I didn't know about their family. So there were just like a couple of things where it was like mentioned kind of their family situation. So you have time, listeners, to go out there and read the first two.
There you go.
I'll be honest, as soon as I finished this, I was like, I must read the first two. I was like, I don't want to read anything except Cat right now. Like, I was super on a binge. So unfortunately, I got sidetracked with something else that I needed to read before a certain date. But they are like next on my list, because I just, and that was the book that Jeff and Will, when they were on the podcast with us, they were like, I think it's A Gentleman Never Keeps Score, is the first one. And, yeah, so they said like, or that's the second one, but the first one is It Takes Two to Tumble. But they said A Gentleman Never Keeps Score was like their absolute favorite of hers. So, and I'm just like bursting at the seams to read it. Like, I can't wait.
Well, excellent. I mean, luckily she has, she said 11 books, so lots. You can go on a real binge.
I can. I have lots more to read, and I'm excited. Like, I've just had a really great time reading it. So we're going to link to that book in the show notes so that you can pre-order your copy and get to reading when it comes out. And again, I think it's a really great book for this time. It's light, it's happy, and it's fun, and it's super well written. So I don't know. Can't say enough about it.
Excellent. Perfect. And so if you are really excited about Two Rogues Make a Right, or you just want to learn more about Cat and the other books she has, you can visit her website. As she said, it's catsebastian.com. Super easy to find. And you could also find her on Twitter at Cat S Writes. And her Instagram handle is the same, although she told us really just go to Twitter because that's where she lives.
Yeah, although maybe there's going to be some dog pictures, so who knows?
Yeah, all about them dog pictures.
Seriously. And so just as a reminder, as we're wrapping up here, we always love to hear from you guys. So we'd love to hear what you thought of our interview and of our interviews in general. Or if you have a book recommendation or questions for us, send us an email. We're at romancepod@gmail.com.
Absolutely.
And if you'd like to find us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at T as in Tom, N as in Nancy Strumpets, Facebook and Pinterest /T and Strumpets, Instagram. I meant Instagram and Twitter at T as in Tom, N as in Nancy Strumpets, and then Facebook and Pinterest / and then YouTube by searching our name. And if you've listened to our podcast before, you've heard us say all those things, so hopefully you know how to find us.
Yes, and as it is Pride Month and we are part of the Frolic Network, you should all be checking out the awesome stuff going on at the Big Gay Fiction podcast.
Yes, remember, we mentioned this last week, but they have like a bajillion things going on this month in honor of Pride Month. So like if you like what you heard today, you're definitely going to like all the exciting stuff that they have. So be sure to check them out.
And so, Zoe, while this interview was fantastic and we've heard about all these things, we need to know what we're reading next week.
We sure do. And I'm very excited for this. We talked about this author in this episode. So like,
yay!
I know. Next week, we're reading Mrs. Martin's Incomparable Adventure by Courtney Milan. And this is a female-female romance, and it's also a senior romance. So, like, we are getting a lot of exciting new things to read, and I'm just so excited.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm very excited to read it and continuing on this lovely month of June.
Absolutely. So join us next week as we read Mrs. Martin's Incomparable Adventure by Courtney Milan.
And may all your ever afters end happily.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. I think that I don't know if I articulated it very well because, you know, we're not all perfect.
Sorry, Zoe, 1 second.
What?
The lamb curd, please. Yes. Actually, put it in for 35 because usually it's not done after 30.
Oh, I'm so hungry. Lamb curry sounds delicious.
It's a lamb curry meat pie, Zoe. It's even better.
Oh, okay. All right. It's 11:58. We're going to finish this intro, and then soon we'll both be eating lunch.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. So, okay, cool. So now we're recording there, and now I'm going to click record on this session. So we'll start recording in a moment. It does say recording. If it kicks anybody off, then what happens is that it generates those recordings, and then we just I'll come back and it generates new recordings. But hopefully I won't do that. So far, so good. Cool. Shall we then just like get started and pretend we don't know each other for a second?
Okay.
Oh, what's happening?
Okay.
Oh no.
I'm just kidding.
I was like, Kelsey, don't
No,
scare me.
we're good. I'm on the correct internet. I have restarted my computer twice. We're good.
Excellent. I'm so happy. All right. So, Kelsey, I'll let you take it away.
All right.
Maybe as a reader of not rabid. What was I going to say? As a very, oh my God, what is the word that I mean to read a lot? Avid? Maybe. Yeah, avid was not rabid. Oh gosh. As a very avid reader of historical romance.
Hi, I'm Laura Von Holt from the Mermaid Podcast, part of the Frolic Podcast Network. The Mermaid Podcast is, you guessed it, all about mermaids. I cover everything from mermaid legend and history to mermaids in pop culture, movies, and TV. My guests include mermaid experts, mermaid historians, mermaid authors, mermaid charities, mermaid tale makers, and even professional mermaids. Yes, being a mermaid is a real job. It turns out that talking about mermaids is kind of like playing that Kevin Bacon game. You start with mermaids, and within 6 degrees or less, you end up connecting mermaids to almost any other topic in the world. Things you never would have thought of all lead back to mermaids. Like religion, and mummies, and a few English queens. So whether you have legs or fins, are a mermaid queen or a mermaid at heart, the Mermaid Podcast has something for you. You can find us at mermaidpodcast.com and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.